Hi, everyone. I'm Shelley Redmond, CEO of the Huntington Society of Canada. It has been an amazing weekend of learning, interacting, and generally being there for one another as part of this wonderful and inspirational community. It's been a full weekend, and we have one final showstopper as our closing keynote. Danea Horn is the author of Chronic Resilience, a personal and honest look at the intersection of life and chronic disease. She is currently a postdoctoral scholar researching policies to increase value and accessibility in healthcare. In this session, Danea will share the challenges, humor, and insights that led her to a unique brand of self-care that she uses to manage multiple chronic conditions and remain engaged with life. Danea describes what it means to have resilience when there is no normal to get back to. This might strike a chord with many of you tuning in today. I think everyone will take away something valuable from this heartfelt presentation, such as a new understanding of self-compassion and methods to manage the weight of being resilient. Danea, I'm excited to pass the screen over to you.
Thank you, Shelley. It is an absolute honor. I just want to thank the Huntington Society of Canada for inviting me to be with you. And I want to thank everybody that has taken a pause from life to participate in the conference and to join this session. It is truly an honor to share my small slice of experience with resilience with you today. So I highly encourage you to join in the chat online, to connect with each other, and to talk to really make this a conversation about resilience and how resilience can change based on what's going on. So I'm going to share my screen. If there's a technical difficulty with that, I certainly hope that somebody will flag me and let me know. Let's see. Okay. So we'll start at the beginning. Some years ago, I found myself in a doctor's office. I was in there for a quick, no big deal, check in, get some lab work, talk about the weather, leave with everything as it was before. And of course, I go into the doctor's office. He looks at my chart and he announces that he thinks I probably have about 6 months until I can join the National Kidney Transplant List here in the United States. Sometimes life just changes in an instant. There is no normal to get back to. I have a suspicion that many, if not all of you, have had that type of moment. I didn't cry in the doctor's office. I think I was too stunned. I made it back to my car and sat there for a few moments before driving home. And then when I got home, I basically ate everything in sight. All kinds of pasta and garlic bread. I think I finished probably with cheesecake. If I had been in Canada, I certainly would have taken down some sort of massive portion of poutine and finished with cake. And with all of that cheese and all of those carbs, I was trying so hard to push down the thought that this wasn't happening to me, that this wasn't happening right now. I desperately just wanted something to be different. I was just stunned. I mean, transplant sounded so dramatic that I was going to really need somebody else's kidney put into my body, and then I would have to suppress my immune system for the rest of my life to try to convince my body that this organ that was really doing us a favor was a welcome visitor and not an invader. And by the next morning, a few things were very clear. Two in particular. The first one was never eat that much in one setting again. I can't say that I stuck to that promise when I'm upset. You know, we tend to think the future is going to be different than the present. Of course, I have overeaten in those ways. But the second thought was the more important one at the time. And that thought was, I will fix this. I am 100% not going to have a kidney transplant. Well, that didn't work out particularly well for me. Here I am, fresh out of kidney transplant surgery. This was actually just over 9 years ago. So from that day in the doctor's office to joining you on this Sunday today has been this wild, crazy, twisting journey that demolished the way that I approached life. I used to think that healing was sort of perfection, absence of disease, getting back to whole. And I now think something very different that I am excited to share with you. So we're going to be talking about these chronic things that just insert themselves into life. A diagnosis, but of course it doesn't have to be that. There are all sorts of things that can take our breath away and change life in just one instant. But it's these things that are going to be with us for the long haul. So we're going to be talking about those. And I'm going to leave you with 3 things that I have done in my life to practice resilience. I offer them to you, not as an answer, but as a fellow patient, somebody who has experience having a caregiver, somebody who has just a few experiences with really needing to step into a different type of resilience. So of course, it's extremely odd to go from healthy young woman to all of a sudden needing a kidney transplant. And that was not, of course, the case for me. I was born with something called bacterial association. So bacterial is an acronym for different parts of the body. So for example, B stands for vertebrae, R stands for renal, L stands for limbs, and a child is diagnosed with having bacterial association if they're born with a malformation in 3 or more of these systems. And of course, I had something going on basically in all of them. I had 10 surgeries before I was 2 years old. In this picture here, I actually didn't break both of my legs. I was also born with a dislocated hip, and I think this was the doctor's sort of attempt to realign things and avoid another surgery. I ended up having the surgery. But part of bacterial for me, sort of the lasting impacts past all of those surgeries, is that I have some wonky vertebrae that occasionally cause stupid amounts of pain in reality. I also have some digestive issues, and then of course, kidney. So the R in renal manifested in me as just one single kidney that had a malformation between the connection that connected the kidney to my bladder. And that made me extra susceptible to kidney infections. And when I was in high school, I had a slew of them, like one after the other. And each kidney infection leaves a small scar on your kidney. And eventually, as it was explained to me, it's like trying to drive 100 miles on a car that has a blown out tire. The rest of the tires are going to go and you're going to need a replacement. So of course, because I'd had all of these infections in high school, it was not a surprise to me that my kidney was damaged. That's why I was in that doctor's office that day for that quick check-in appointment. But I assumed that my kidney function, even though lower than normal, was going to last me for the rest of my life. I didn't ever imagine that I was going to get to the point that I would need the replacement. And so, of course, an appropriate response to hearing that you're going to need a replacement kidney is, I'm going to fix this. So I headed down to the local bookstore and sat on the floor of the self-help section and started to try to figure it out. Hearing stories of people that had spontaneous remissions from cancer or miraculous healings from unimaginable circumstances, people whose doctors told them that they'd never be able to walk, that were all of a sudden walking. And so in my mind, I thought, okay, damaged kidney, but like, I can fix this. You know, I can be one of those stories that all of a sudden, you know, I'm on the news program with like miraculous healing. We figured out how to deal with kidney damage. And so I read all sorts of books with titles like You Can Heal Your Life, The Mind and the Brain, The Mind-Body Connection. And with each book, of course, I felt hopeful. I read amazing stories of the way that the mind and the body work together, and I was convinced that I could change things. But nothing changed. All I did was end up with a bunch of books on my bookshelf and a lot of hope that sort of led nowhere. And things basically devolved from here. So I started with books, and then I headed over to Google. And I said affirmations, lovely things like I am healed and whole. I said them to myself before I fell asleep at night and first thing in the morning. I tried all sorts of meditation, mind body scan, focusing on your thoughts. My thoughts were clouds passing through my mind. I tried to heal my inner child. I talked with her for hours about every traumatic experience she had been through. At least when I read books like Eat, Pray, Love, I could sort of convince myself that I was reading a travel book, but somehow by the end, all of a sudden, I knew that if I could just get to an ashram in India and finally learn how to really meditate, then something would change in my body. And of course, my kidney function continued to get worse. And I thought, okay, well, I haven't been able to find a book or a solution or a perfect affirmation or create a vision board or any of the other myriad of positive thinking solutions did anything for me. So it must be that whatever the trauma is that is manifesting as this disease in my life must be buried very, very deep. And so I thought, I'm going to need somebody else's help to get at whatever the subconscious thoughts are that are creating this reality in my life. So I saw a therapist, and then I saw a hypnotherapist, and then I saw an intuitive healer. And with this intuitive healer, I found myself sitting across from a very lovely woman in my living room who was sobbing, intuiting apparent experiences that I'd had as an infant that were traumatic that I was still dealing with. Except that I wasn't experiencing any of that. I did not have tears. I didn't understand quite what was going on in this experience. And I thought, somewhere along the way, I've really gone awry. Something is not quite right here. So we need to take a sidebar for stress. I was feeling really stressed and desperate. I was searching and nothing was happening. So think about stress as if you had a table in your house. I hope you enjoy my very highly skilled graphic design representations of a table here as just a straight line. But imagine there's a table and it's in the middle of the room and you decide, gosh, like I really wanted open space in this room and the table is just taking up too much of that space. And I would really like to move the table to the far end of the room, or I would like to just move the table completely out of the room. So you walk up to the table and you push, and the table doesn't go anywhere. And so you push a little bit harder, and still the table is exactly where it was when you started. And so you think, okay, this is a heavy table. I've just got to shove into it with my hip or my back. So you give it an even harder shove and it still doesn't go anywhere. And so then you find other people to try to help you move this table. And all of this force is now being pushed against this table, except what you don't realize is that the table is nailed to the floor and just really is not going to go anywhere. And you can shove and you can push, but the table is just going to be there. So that's what stress is. It's a force or systems of forces that tend to strain or deform a body. And that's not even like a holistic definition of stress. That's a physics definition of stress. So pushing all of this force against something that is not going to go anywhere, that force has to go somewhere. And that force came straight back on me. The more I searched and the more I thought I was buying into hope and some sort of positive solution, the more I was feeling burnt out and tired the higher my blood pressure was going, which was making my kidney function worse. And somehow in my search for a fix, I was just making an absolute mess of things. That's why all those books were piled on the floor. I think one day out of frustration, I pulled them all off of the bookshelves and decided that I was just shoving against a table that wasn't going to go anywhere. And I was going to have to learn how to deal with having that table right in the middle of my room. So shortly after this time, where I'd had the experience with the intuitive healer, I was driving towards one of my favorite places. We're fortunate where I live to be right at the base of the Sierra Mountains. I cannot imagine the beauty, and I'm sure many of you have spaces like this in Canada, but I was headed this direction. I needed a break. And I was starting to think about all of the different techniques I'd tried, all of the gurus' books that I'd read, all of the psychiatry books that I had read, and why all of that learning was not translating into a different physical reality for me. Why I had bought into this idea that something could just miraculously be different if I changed my mind enough. And this ridiculously, embarrassingly simple idea came to me. That I'm human. That I am just absolutely chronically human. And being human comes with tables that are sometimes just nailed to the ground. Diagnoses that are what they are, different circumstances that we may want to change, because part of being human is not creating this sort of ultimate experience. But being human is dealing with all of the challenges that are not fair in any way. They're not evenly distributed. Bodies break down, bodies age, bodies have health hiccups. And it had just never occurred to me that maybe my body was just a human, normal body, and that needing the kidney transplant was the natural evolution of being born with bacterial association. I think I was just trying so hard to sort of avoid what I was heading towards, that my mind created this reality where I could have something that just really felt different. And even though this thought was so basically simple, so normal, so should have occurred to me years ago, it came with so much forgiveness for myself. Because when I was pushing so hard against that table, I was just pushing against myself. I felt like somehow I had caused kidney disease. I hadn't prevented the infections enough in high school. I hadn't taken good enough care of my body to find myself in this circumstance. I kept having this thought, like, why am I punishing myself? And all of that force and stress was just not doing me any favors. It was making me perfectly responsible for being human, which is 100% out of my control and your control. It's just who we are. So I had to figure out, if the table is nailed here, what exactly does resilience look like? So a lot of times this term resilience is used as if a community has faced a natural disaster and wow, they were resilient. They were able to restore the town exactly back to how it was before they faced this disaster. But what if the thing that you're dealing with is chronic and there's no getting back to before times? There is only dealing with what the next challenge is and thinking about how to plan for the future. What does resilience look like in those circumstances when the answer that you're seeking isn't going to come from a doctor necessarily, or a book, or anything else that we seek out? How do you rearrange life to really embody resilience in a way that it's dynamic, that it can change over time? And here's what that looked like for me in my life. So I have 3 ways that I practice resilience. The first one is permission. So shortly after I had that drive towards the mountains, and I had my massive realization that I'm human, I realized that there was this little version of myself that I kept in my head that I needed to deal with. So I had this very melodramatic day where I sat down and wrote this journal entry. And I talked to this version of myself. So that version, that Danea, only eats green things. She works out every single day. She only has positive thoughts. She never gets bored or frustrated or angry. She takes perfect care of her health. And she never wants to binge watch TV or waste time scrolling on her phone. And I was putting her up on this pedestal as if I needed to live up to that all of the time. And so I had to sit this version of myself down and tell her that she had to go. I could not hold her. I couldn't have space for her in my mind anymore. I was not living up to the expectations, to what she was assuming that my life should be, and that I wasn't adhering to. So I did. I wrote this whole thing about, okay, perfect, Danea, like you're done. Like, we're human. There's no version where I'm only going to eat green things and work out every single day and never have slip-ups. So I let her go. And there was grief involved in that. There is grief involved in knowing that you're human and you have a diagnosis, or you have to care for a loved one that has a diagnosis, and that the future just looks different. There is some expectation that we all hold in life that sometimes we have to let go. And sometimes that involves tears, or writing things on a piece of paper and burning that piece of paper in a safe way. Whatever it is that you have to do to think about what is the image that you're holding in your mind of how life should go. And if it's creating a stress because for whatever reason, life's not going to live up to that outcome, just grieve it. And of course, that's easier said than done. And it's not instantaneous. And of course, I still have moments where I feel guilty for eating more sugar than I intended to, or for not, I wanted that perfect version of myself to go, and she sticks around occasionally, but I try my best to keep her in place. So I titled this first thing permission, because after you let whatever the expectation go is, you're still dealing with a table that's nailed to the ground, or a diagnosis, or a circumstance. You still have to think about what you're going to do with that thing, how you're going to decorate around it. And that involves giving that thing permission to be in your life. So I think of permission as very different from acceptance. Acceptance is a word that we hear a lot. You just have to accept the reality. And acceptance makes sense, right? Acceptance means that when you're faced with stress and you're pushing all of that force against something that's not going to change, if you can accept that that's there, all of a sudden you get that energy back. You're not, that force that was being pushed relaxes. But that doesn't mean that you sort of take ownership of that thing being in your life. It doesn't mean that you allow it to. You accept that it's there, but It could be begrudgingly, frustratingly, angrily. Permission says, I didn't invite you. I didn't ask for this. I didn't necessarily want to go through this challenge. This isn't what I saw my life to be, but I'm going to allow it. It's a very subtle change that puts things in your control. It's a way of talking with yourself about your life story and about your circumstances and allowing that thing to have permission to be in your life, whatever it is. So I allowed permission for a transplant. I came to the idea that maybe my healing, in whatever form that was going to be, wasn't going to look like spontaneous. It was maybe going to look like surgery and lifelong medication and follow-ups with doctors. And that was okay, that I could allow that to be part of my story. So that's the first thing. The second thing is action. Resilience isn't just this feeling of getting back to some sort of level of homeostasis or comfort or okay with the way that things are. It's also putting together an action plan. So when you allow whatever it is permission to be in your life, then you think about what are the things that I can do to create the best possible outcome given whatever cruddy circumstance I am sitting in the middle of. So I will share with you some actions that I've taken that I found helpful in my life. These are not the same actions that you will take in your life. Of course, everybody's diagnosis, prognosis, where you're at with your health, all of those things are going to change which actions are the most important. But here are a few things that I've incorporated into my life and how I sort of think about action and what actions create my kind of action plan. So the first thing, years ago, when I just had kidney disease, before I had heard those words, kidney transplant, I had gotten online and started looking at some of the clinical research for what would help the specific kind of kidney disease that I had had. And I found that eating a low protein diet really helped in some of the clinical trials. And so I became vegetarian. And my doctor, when I told him, said, wow, that's actually really great. And of course, my first thought was like, why didn't you tell me this years ago? So I felt like, okay, this is something that I can do that's in my control, that's going to help my health out. And a few years later, we moved and I met with a new doctor. And that doctor said, well, if you're avoiding animal protein, which she agreed was an important thing to do to help prolong my kidney function, she said the two things that at the time I really did not want to hear. Why are you still eating eggs and cheese and butter? And obviously, she was not aware of what I do when I want to have thoughts that I don't want to think about. My comfort was macaroni and cheese and, all of these things that at the time I was completely unwilling to give up. So I started playing mind games with myself. I knew that that was the best thing to do, but I just thought, well, when I'm at home, I'll cook that way. But when we eat out, I'm going to eat whatever I want. And of course, that meant that I was just going to eat whatever I wanted all of the time. And I really wasn't making any changes in my diet. I was learning a little thing here or there. I was experimenting with some new products, which weren't great at the time. But I really wasn't making this big change. And one day my husband came to me and said, dairy doesn't make me feel great. And he said, I think I'm going to give that up. And I thought, well, gosh, if you're going to do it, I'm supposed to do it. So together we made this black and white rule that we just don't eat that stuff ever. And that became so much easier for me to follow. I know it sounds counterintuitive. But now when I go to a restaurant, instead of thinking about all of the things that I want to eat, that I can't eat, that I'm craving, I think about how can I order in a way that's the best for my specific diagnosis, that's the best for helping my body to now accept and thrive with the transplant. And when I cook at home, no matter what I'm craving, I can easily go online and just Google lasagna and plant-based or tacos and plant-based and find a really delicious recipe that meets my craving. And by making this very black and white rule, it allowed a lot more creativity in my cooking. It allowed me to get more excited about food again and not think so much about all of the things that I wanted to eat that just weren't the best for my body. Now, that is to say that occasionally I still do get cravings, of course. And so I have a myriad of recipes for all kinds of cupcakes and scones and mac and cheese and all of that, but those things are in alignment with something that's going to be healthier for me. So creating a black and white rule also freed up all of this mental space, because instead of going into every meal with a sort of mental battle of, gosh, I really want this and I can't have it, and playing games with myself around, well, it's just once this week. For me, I am not the kind of person that can like occasionally stray from the way that I'm supposed to eat. I just have to do it all the time. So I found that helpful. The second thing that I do, I have to take medication twice a day, 12 hours apart. Instead of having to remember throughout the day, is it 9 a.m. yet? Is it 9 p.m. yet? I set an alarm on my phone and I don't think about it anymore. And once a week, I fill up a medication tray with all of my pills. And so I don't have to think every time about what do I need to take at this time of the day. I just grab a handful of pills and wash it down. So I know that also sounds ridiculously simple, set an alarm on your phone. There are a lot of apps that can help manage all sorts of different diseases and symptoms that are certainly helpful. But both of those things, my black and white rule and my set the alarm rule, are just ways to incorporate things that we know are going to be the best, given that the table's nailed to the ground, without having to think about them all of the time. So then a few other just silly side things that I do. One, I comfort myself. When I was little and my mom would take me to the myriad of doctor's appointments that we had, physical therapy, whatever it was, afterwards we would go and share a meal together or get a treat. And I still do those things. So if I go in for lab work, I get to have a fun latte afterwards. If it's been a particularly hard day or I'm in pain, I allow myself to binge watch all kinds of TV and take a break from life laying on a heating pad. Because those comforting things are really important to be kind to yourself with too. The super indulgent, take a break, let other things go. And I know that those times and those moments are not always easy to find, and they need to be slipped into life here or there. But really knowing what the things are for you that allow your mind to focus on something that isn't the table that's nailed to the ground, that isn't the thing that you really want to change and maybe haven't quite accepted yet or welcomed or given permission to be in your life. Those moments are also really important, those tiny little moments of comfort and indulgent. And so know what your list is of those things. For me, it's having a sweet with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. It's doing a puzzle. It's sitting with my husband and enjoying a movie. It's sitting outside, going for a hike in nature. All of those tiny things I keep at the forefront of my mind, because when I'm stressed, it's really easy for me to forget the things that bring me back, the things that help me deal with whatever the hardship is at the moment. The next action I take is to speak up, and this is not always easy. So one day I was post-transplant, I was in my doctor's office. I go in every 6 months, and my normal doctor was out that day for whatever reason. And a trainee was filling in. This is somebody that I had seen prior to the transplant. I had a rapport with. So we came in and we're talking. He's going through my chart. And there is a medication that I take that my regular doctor and I have agreed is an important one for me to prevent future kidney infections. And this doctor said, you know, what about we go off of that medication? Now, this is not a moment that I am particularly proud of, but the thing that came out of my mouth was, is it going to be you today? And he sort of stammered and said, hold on, ran out of the exam room, grabbed his attending physician who came in. We as a team agreed to keep me on the medication until I could see my regular doctor again. And now I have heard that my file in their office has a big sticker on it that says that Danea is never to see any doctor other than her normal one. So if he happens to be needing to run over to the hospital for another patient, they call and reschedule my appointment. So I had to stick up for myself. But sometimes I am the people pleaser sort of person that wants to be happy, and it's hard for me to say, is it going to be you today? I'm not comfortable with what's going on. And I certainly could have said that in a much kinder way or had a conversation with him about this medication. But my gut reaction was to stand up for my health, and I am extremely proud that I did. So the next thing that is an action that not this one just isn't for me, this is for all of us, is to find a community of people that are going through the exact same thing that you're going through. And not even necessarily the same prognosis, but going through it at the same time or has been through what you're about to walk through. I cannot stress how transformative this was for me. Going into the transplant, I was super fearful. The medications that you have to take actually damage the transplanted kidney. They make you more susceptible to things like cancer and have a host of side effects that can be really impactful on day-to-day life. I was nervous about all of those things. When I would ask my medical team for comfort about, so what is it really like to have to take these anti-rejection drugs? They would say, oh, yeah, those things are pretty rough. When I would think about what is it actually going to be like to live in the world immune suppressed during flu season or a pandemic like COVID, I got training on how to wash my hands and use hand sanitizer and think about the foods that I was eating to always be food safe. But it just felt like life was going to be so completely different. And I didn't have a model for somebody that had walked through it and was thriving. A few months before my transplant, I started volunteering for Donate Life California. And the true miracle that I couldn't have found in all of the books is that I met 3 amazing women that all have transplants, and we're all absolutely thriving. So here we are together in my hospital room as I was recovering, laughing so hard that my stitches hurt. The nurses were asking the other patients on my recovery floor if they wanted their doors shut because we were making such a ruckus. And fortunately, the patients said that they were enjoying the laughter. You know, we're in there showing each other our scars and talking. They were sharing their experiences of healing from their transplants and funny anecdotes about dealing with the side effects. And it really just showed me that there could be a reality in which my table was nailed to the ground and I was also okay. That I would have the ability and the strength and the support to navigate through that. And I highly encourage you to find that support. Obviously, being part of the Huntington Society of Canada, coming to this conference, hopefully in the future seeing each other in person, sharing the darkest of dark humor. There is something about people that are going through your same health challenge that just get it. They get it on a level that you can joke about things that other people would be completely horrified by. And so this for me was absolutely vital and I think an action that I continue to nurture, that we have text chains now going all the time. And so from 9 years ago until now, these women have become my sisters and I am just over the moon thankful for them. So after you give yourself permission, give your diagnosis or your challenge or whatever the present moment of your life is, once you give that thing permission to be in your life, then you need to sit down and come up with what the action plan is. What are the things that are in your control to deal with this circumstance that feels so completely out of control, that you did not invite, but you're going to give permission to be in your life. And you have to repeat. So with anything chronic, anything that is going to be with us for the rest of our lives, things will change, time will change. Your symptoms may change, what it's like to be a caregiver might change. And so those 3 steps are something that you repeat. You go back to the beginning. Whatever that present moment is that you are walking into or sitting in the middle of, again, go through the process of grieving what you were hoping the reality was going to be. Go through the process of giving that new present moment permission to be in your life. And then go through the process of putting together an action plan to deal with the new reality. Because of course, resilience when you're dealing with something chronic means that there is no normal to go back to. So there's only this repetitive process of continuing to be resilient. I titled my book Chronic Resilience because chronic conditions require us to be resilient over and over again. So in the last moments that I have with you, I know we've got about 15 plus or minus minutes left. I want to talk a bit about caregiving. So on October 7th, 2013, my sweet husband, Philip, donated his kidney to me. This was not something I asked him to do. He jumped at the opportunity to do it. I don't think I could prevent him from doing it, even if I had wanted to. It was amazing that we had the same blood type and were compatible donors. Here we are making rounds in our recovery floor of the hospital, because of course walking is really important after surgery. It was really hard for me to ask the person that I love so much, who had already given so much of himself to me in terms of dealing with the other health issues that crop up in my life from time to time. He had already been an amazing caregiver. And now I was going to have to allow this person that I love so much to give a literal piece of his body to me. I know he would tell you that it was the easiest decision that he ever made and the proudest thing that he's done in my life. Those are also hard things for me to hear. Because as a patient, I can do those steps. I have accepted that I need to give kidney disease and bacterial association and the things that are in my life, I have to give them permission to just mess things up occasionally. But then when you have to ask somebody that you just adore and love, be it a spouse, a sibling, a parent, a child, to also impact their life, to require them to walk through the steps of resilience, to ask them to also grieve what you were hoping life would be together, to ask them to give permission for this diagnosis to upset the balance of things, and then to sit together and come up with an action plan, and then repeat that over and over again is not easy. And I don't know sometimes where he finds the strength to pat my back while he is also dealing with stresses in his own life. And I'm not an easy patient. I especially when I have these moments of pain that come from some degenerative disc disorder that I deal with in my neck and in my mid-back. Sometimes I push him away because I don't want him to have to go through those steps. And I don't want to upset our day or not be able to join him for whatever the physical activity or fun is that he's going to do. Sometimes I have to upset the balance of things And then, of course, he's still there to pat my back. And from the patient perspective, it is really hard to be a patient, to allow a caregiver to care for you out of the love and the joy and the compassion that they have for what you're going through. We healed well from the surgery, despite what this picture looks like. It's actually a more challenging surgery for the donor, the living donor, to go through because of where the kidney is situated in the body. It's a laparoscopic surgery. It was a much easier sort of plop the kidney in me. But of course, being immune suppressed, we were extra careful in the beginning. And here we are. So this was right at about our 20th wedding anniversary, which we just celebrated, which was 9 years after the transplant. So for our 11th wedding anniversary, we found ourselves in the hospital going through the transplant, which we will both tell you was an absolute miracle, that the hospital staff had learned how to do that we could share a kidney between us, and that could allow me to do hikes with my husband, who gets to challenge me every day to do things that sometimes I think that I might not be able to do. So from the patient side, I have learned a few things about how to make it easier for my caregiver. So one of the things that I am not great about doing, and one of the things that is the biggest caregiving between my husband Philip and I, is when I have these moments of debilitating pain. And I tend to try to hide them initially. Of course, he can tell that he can see it on my face and in the tension in my body. He knows that I'm in pain, but again, I don't want to mess with whatever he was planning his day to be. And so I try to hide it. And of course, that's not helpful. So from the patient side, being more honest with him, as honest as I can be about what my reality is, allows him to adjust around that without feeling helpless and wanting to help and fix it for me. Just as I was searching in all the books and determining that I was going to fix whatever it was that I was dealing with, I know that my caregiver feels the same way. He wants to take away any pain that I have. He's willing to give organs to me in order to allow me to fully heal. And that's not, I don't want to be an imposition, even though that's what being a family member is going through the ups and downs in life. And of course, sometimes he's the one that needs caregiving, but it's still hard to accept. So I know that I tend to hide things. And when I hide things, I just get cranky. And he knows when I'm just cranky that something's going on. And so I've learned to try to speak up more about what my reality is, even if my speaking up says, I need some space to deal with this. Sometimes when physical pain gets intense, it can be hard to speak or to give instructions. And sometimes I don't even necessarily know what it is that would help that he could do. So if I can give him a heads up about where I'm at and be honest about what I think would be the most helpful, even if it is just giving me space, I've learned to try to be better about that. And from his perspective, he will tell you that sometimes he has to not take it personally, that he can't fix whatever it is that I'm dealing with. He has to take it not personally if I'm not in a great mood because things are challenging that day. And so he has learned to try to do things that help, that are not actively helping. So for example, if I'm having back pain, instead of actively rubbing my back, he'll do the dishes or do the laundry or do some of the things around the house to make it a calm, healing, peaceful environment. But that's not actually trying to interfere or mess with whatever I am trying to deal with on my own. And just this morning, we were sitting together on the couch and talking about pain. I've been dealing with one of my episodes for a little over a week now. And I've gotten myself to obviously to a comfortable spot to get to be here with you today. But he and I were talking about, I've had these moments since we got married because of the darn V in bacterial association. And we've been told by doctors that this is going to be the one thing that will be the most challenging as I tend to age, because things get more challenging as we all age. People tend to get more back pain, not less, as they get older. So we were sitting together on the couch and going through essentially my resilience plan. We were talking about, gosh, we've really been dealing with these episodes for 20 years now, me for longer. How do we come up with a plan so we know in the moment how to work with what's going on? We may not be able to cure it, but for the long time, it's felt like I've done this piecemeal approach of dealing with things. And actually, as good as I was about sitting down and walking through my resilience process for the kidney, I have not been great about sitting down and walking through my resilience process for back pain. So I understand. He's hesitant to give suggestions because of course, my response is, I've tried that. I don't want to, the normal. I've been there, I've done that. You think after 20 years, I haven't tried everything under the sun to make these less. But I took a deep breath and I tried to be more open, because instead of just putting out the tiny little fires that come up, we wanted to put together an actual plan to make permission for chronic pain to be in our lives, and to think about a plan and a way that we can work together to maybe lessen the severity, to lessen the duration. And instead of sort of shutting down and feeling like, I'll just deal with this on my own, I don't want you to have to worry about it. Yes, I understand it's an inconvenience, but I got it. I tried to be open to his suggestions. I tried to be open to his observations of, when I am in moments of pain, it's hard to think about things outside of what will make me comfortable in this exact moment. And so listening to his observations of how we could deal with this together was good. And so we have now sat down and thought about, what are the stretches that I can do? What are the preventative things that I can do? What are the things that we can do in the moment? And of course, we're going to have to do this again, because things will change over time. They won't necessarily get better. I'll just have to figure out what the new adjustment is to allow those things to be in our life. So resilience is permission. It's taking the best actions given whatever your present circumstance is, and then repeating, going back to the beginning and working through, allowing permission again, grieving what we thought the expectations were going to be, taking what the actions that we know are going to be the best for our body and our circumstances, and then repeating. So again, I titled my book Chronic Resilience because, of course, resilience is not a one-time fix. When it's chronic, it's going to be chronic, and you have to go and do resilience over and over again. So actually the book came out the day that my doctor called and told me that I was officially in kidney failure and it was time to schedule the transplant. So the book came out, I had the transplant, and then I started thinking about, outside of my diagnosis, the book I had detailed other women's stories of how they incorporate chronic illness into their life. Women with rheumatoid arthritis, breast cancer, diabetes, other transplants, lung transplant. And I started thinking about all of our stories and how I could contribute in an even broader way. As much as I thought about each woman's story as this individual outcome, if I backed up, I could see broad patterns in our silly healthcare system here in the United States. I could see broader patterns in the resources and the information that people had. And I thought if I could go and get a researcher's toolkit, maybe I could answer some broad questions about health and healthcare. So after I was all healed up from the transplant, I went back to school and got my master's in economics. I continued to get a PhD studying health economics and now research the pharmaceutical industry and people's responses and behavior to new drugs coming onto the market. And I have accomplished more than I had expected. The pandemic certainly threw a darn wrench in things. But by that time, I was well versed in what it was like to live immune suppressed. And I, knock on wood, so far, things have been going really according to plan. And I am so thankful for my husband, who's my donor. And honestly, I am really thankful that I took that drive that day and realized that I'm human. And I didn't have to push so hard to fix things that were not fixable. That I could just be okay with the body that I had, with the past that I had. Because anytime I notice myself trying to push against something that's not going to change, be it something that's already happened, something that I am worried about happening, anytime that I notice that I am putting that kind of force against it, I think about the force that might push back against myself. And I ask, is this something that I actually can change with some effort and an action plan? Or is this a table that is nailed to the ground that I need to decide is going to be in my life, and I have to come up with an action plan to work with that? It's not all about fixes and positive thinking and making the most of things. Sometimes it is literally getting down into the nitty-gritty and figuring out what are the things that you can do to create the best possible outcome given the circumstances. And so I will leave you with this thought that life can be incredibly chronic, but we can also be incredibly resilient. Thank you.
Danea, thank you so much for sharing your experience, your wisdom, and compassion. You have given us some powerful tools to use in all areas of our lives, and for that we are very grateful. Thank you so much to all of our speakers and sponsors for making this conference possible. It is such a unique and valuable learning experience, and your generosity continues to amaze and uphold the community. To everyone who participated, we want to hear what you thought about the programming, the processes, platform, and topics. Please take a few minutes to fill out the conference survey, which will be emailed to you at the end of this session, to allow us to plan future events that incorporate what you want to learn about and how to do so. We absolutely thrive on being able to bring educational and support services to individuals and families facing HD, as well as funding research, but we need your help. One of our biggest fundraisers is the Amaryllis campaign, which is now on until early December. These make amazing presents. Everything you need to grow a beautiful amaryllis is contained within the decorative box. Check out inspirehope.ca for how to order a single plant or a case of 12, and you will be enabling us to provide more support for people who need it. And speaking of research and support services, who else is excited about our big announcements in honor of the 50th anniversary? We have the Huntington Disease Research Chair held at Western University to attract even more amazing dedicated researchers to concentrate on HD. There are big plans to expand access to HD experienced healthcare services through the first steps towards the Centers for HD Care. And we have goals to increase our current research and family service offerings, all in support of improving the quality of life for those with HD. It's going to be a year jam-packed with fundraising firsts and bold steps into a new era, while keeping true to the power of the grassroots community that is the foundation of all that HSC stands for. Finally, I can't wait for our next conference. when it won't be shared, when we won't be sharing these closing remarks via a computer screen. I'll be standing on a stage in Niagara Falls at our in-person national conference. Yes, we are returning to in-person programming, and I'm so excited to meet you all. The dates are November 17th and 18th, 2023, so mark your calendar and start the countdown to connection. And now for a bit of inspiration, allow me to share this little teaser with you. I am so looking forward to that. And to end, our heads are full, our hearts are even fuller. And I'll leave you with just one sentiment, and that is an appreciation for how unique and strong this community is. It was true when HSC was first founded by Ralph and Ariel 50 years ago, and it is true now. You are all amazing and inspirational. Lean on one another, share support, and keep going throughout the HD journey. I thank you all for your support, energy, and commitment this weekend. You'll hear from me soon. Goodbye for now.